This is a collection of passages on death from the writings of Alice A. Bailey and the Tibetan Master Djwhal Khul. Quotes from that source are always accompanied by the geometric background you see now. The quotations are interwoven with numerous reports of related near-death experiences. In these events, individuals die in the sense that they believe they died and are often declared dead by the medical profession. But their apparent death is not quite final, and they return to tell of their experience.
Everything and being in this place was made of light, and everything was light, even though there were individual things and beings. The light is what I remember best. It was living, alive, a living light that was everything and all, the essence of everything and all.
Within the known spheres naught is but light, responsive to the word. Know that that light descends and concentrates itself.
You may hear light, and this is you may say the cosmic sound is nothing but light itself being presented as a vibratory sound.
There came this slowly spinning, very clear white light that had fine silvery and golden tendrils off of it. And as that white light came towards me, one of the most beautiful aspects of it, it came packaged with a perfect musical melody.
Everything was light and vibration and sound. Looking and feeling around me, I began to understand intuitively that we were all part of this divine light.
The reign of the fear of death is well nigh ended, and we shall soon enter upon a period of knowledge and of certainty, which will cut away the ground from under all our fears.
I had died. I was happy for that death. And now coming back out of that, I lost all fear of death. I've been home. I know exactly what's there and waiting for me. I know the love that is there and the acceptance that's there. And I know no matter how many times I screw up trying to do what I'm doing, I know I'm going to be okay.
What happens is that the person says, I've died and I have no fear of death. On the follow-up study, something like 85% or 82% of those who had these experiences have lost all fear of death. And even 10, 20 years later will say the same thing. It's changed their lives.
Our ideas about death have been erroneous. We have looked upon it as the great and ultimate terror, whereas in reality it is the great escape, the entrance into a fuller measure of activity, and the release of the life from the crystallized vehicle and an inadequate form.
I have a car accident, and during this car accident, I have a near-death experience, which means I went out of my body and I have a glimpse of death. And death for me was a big liberation, to be free from the body and free from the mind. And I went to the source, I went to the light, and I feel so released, so at peace. But the inner guidance say, welcome, but we just want to tell you, you didn't finish your mission on earth. And I was sent back, and I was sent back transformed, transcend, metamorphose kind of. And this is where my quest for what is my purpose in life, what is my mission in life, started at the age of 18.
Transition means realization without any physical plane limitations. Death can be best regarded as the experience which frees us from the illusion of form.
When I was out of my body during my NDE, I was stripped of ego. I was stripped of the limitations of my brain. I was stripped of the limitations of my body. And the light that I was in didn't have any of those limitations either. And so there was enough room for this complete, deep, unconditional, pure love. I had this realization that that is me also, that I am that love, that we human beings, we are that love. Every soul is that love because we are one with that light as well. It's just when we come into our bodies and onto planet Earth, we get that what's perceived as a separation, but the separation, it's just an illusion. And so as I was soaking up that love, I realized that that's also who I am too, and that I'm always one with that, and that I had never been alone, even though I had felt alone many times in my life, that light and that love had always been with me.
We are conscious one moment on the physical plane, and a moment later we have withdrawn onto another plane and are actively conscious there.
I was driving down the road, another car was coming the other way. We were going through an intersection. At the last minute, he decided to turn left right in front of me. Bam. I think I had enough time to say, oh my God, didn't even get to say turning. Next thing I knew, I was looking down at the top of my car. So I looked down and I see my car crunched, and I saw the guy get out of his car and walk over to mine, reach in and turn my headlights off. Didn't quite know what that meant until later. And I suddenly lost interest in what was going on down there because I saw this white light over here, which I had heard about, fortunately, and I said, whoa, there's the white light, I'm going.
I was put under anesthesia, and that was the last thing that I was aware of until suddenly I was not under anesthesia and out cold. I was in fact very conscious. I was actually up near the corner of the operating room ceiling.
Just as soon as we know ourselves to be souls, and find that we are capable of focusing our consciousness or sense of awareness in any form or on any plane at will, or in any direction within the form of God, we shall no longer know death.
So literally it felt very physical, but I looked down and I realized I have no body. And there was a point where I was traveling up, and I had the feeling of being everywhere all at once. Everybody's experience I could dive into, and it was as if I was universal consciousness or God consciousness coming in and really living and feeling that person's experience.
Then I saw this big tree in front of me and I started moving towards it. And I realized that I'm flying, and I said, I'm flying. And the voice said, that's normal here. And I get to the tree, and as I get close to it, I become the tree, and I could feel its heart. And I became the leaf, I became the air, I became the birds. Everything that I got near, I became stones. And I realized that everything had life, even though sometimes it looked like it doesn't. It's made of the same things I was made of. And because of that, it owns a sense of spirit. And that's the only thing we own.
For the average good citizen, death is a continuance of the living process in his consciousness and a carrying forward of the interests and tendencies of the life. His consciousness and his sense of awareness are the same and unaltered. He does not sense much difference, is well taken care of, and oft is unaware that he has passed through the episode of death.
And the lightning went through my body and then traveled underneath the house, and it left, and it blew the transformer that was right in front of the house. But once it hit me and went through my body, it left black char marks on the concrete steps. And then I just peeled up out of my body. My spirit just came right up out of my body. And I didn't even know I was dead at that point. I knew something had happened, but I didn't know I was dead. And I just couldn't find whatever was making that radio sound. And then just about the time I started to panic, there was this huge, loving, formless presence that appeared. And I mean, he was huge. And he just filled me full of this peace and this love that I've never felt in my entire life. And I wasn't afraid anymore.
I did become aware of a point of white light, intense, brilliant, gajillion times brighter than the sun. A little point of white light, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was alive. It was like breathing, and somehow I knew I had to go there. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew I had to go there. And remember, I didn't know that I had died. I didn't remember the accident, and I still was trying to figure out what was happening. But I knew I had to go toward the light, and as I approached the light, it got bigger and more intense and more beautiful and more loving, and it sucked me in and absorbed me. And I became the light, and the light became me. I was the white light. And a lot of experiencers talk about love, about this being a place of love. And I've tried to think of adjectives to describe the intensity of this love, unconditional, pure, powerful. The only one that I can think of that works is infinite.
His consciousness and his sense of awareness are the same and unaltered. You must always bear in mind that the consciousness remains the same whether in physical incarnation or out of incarnation, and that development can be carried on with even greater ease than when limited and conditioned by the brain consciousness.
Is when it was just poof and I'm not in my body anymore. And I go up to the ceiling, just like a balloon, I guess. And I realized oh crap, I'm not in my body anymore. And I could see myself after I was out of my body, that's when I heard the machine do the flatline sound. And then I'm watching the people in the room come and try to resuscitate me. And I had no attachment to it at all. I had my one thought, conscious thought at that moment was, suck. That was it. It was really flat affect too. There was no real emotion behind it. It was just well. And then at that moment I realized, oh crap, my snarky personality is still intact. And I'm out of my body, so I'm still me. That's weird. I don't know what I was expecting. I'd never really pondered this before because again, this shouldn't be possible. And I'm watching them work on me and stuff, and I'm hearing some of the comments that were a little upsetting. One of the doctors had commented on how in my records it had said that I had a former addiction to medication, that what do we expect? I was just, some drug addict, but I'd been off of those for 8 years at that point. So I was offended, highly offended. But I wasn't offended at the time. I was offended when I came back. Let me clarify that.
Because when I left my body, through all those things, I was still me. And this is a stretch for people. I was still me at my core. I had the same kind of mischievous sense of humor. The mental talk that goes on in our heads, I was still me. It was a flawless change. I just crossed over. I was still me and I was somewhere else.
There is, as you well know, no angry God, no hell, and no vicarious atonement. There is only a great principle of love animating the entire universe. There is the fact of the soul, and that we are saved by the livingness of that soul, and the only hell is the earth itself, where we learn to work out our own salvation, actuated by the principle of love and light, and incited thereto by the example of the Christ and the inner urge of our own souls. This teaching anent hell is a remainder of the sadistic turn which was given to the thinking of the Christian Church in the Middle Ages and to the erroneous teaching to be found in the Old Testament.
Growing up in this society, it's always about heaven and hell, you know. I'm going, God, is there a hell out there? You know, how could, say, God be so mean to, you know, banish somebody for eternity and all that? So that first near-death experience kind of really cleared up that question, you know, that I realized that there is no hell where you go. It's just a place of beauty, like Rowan was talking about.
In 1955, the phrase near-death experience didn't exist. Nobody even knew what that meant, what that was. So, first of all, here I am, a religious person who has experienced something that would be spiritual, if not religious. My personal problem was that none of my religious experiences were there. I was with the light. There was no judgment, there was no hell, there was no good and bad, there was no big tally in the sky. There was just the light absorbing me and consuming me with unconditional love, in which I was able to consume and absorb everyone else with unconditional love. So that I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand it. So I picked up every book I could read on anything that was spiritual to try to see if it made sense. I investigated all various religions. I went into the seminary. I was going to be a priest, but I left a year before my vows because that couldn't do it. I was distressed until some 20, 25 years later, I pick up this book called, by Raymond Moody, Life After Life. And I don't even know, I would just picked it up on a business trip. I grabbed it for some reason, I know not why, put it in my suitcase. When I got home, I opened it up and I started reading it. And I read it, the whole book, by 4 o'clock in the morning. I didn't do anything. As I'm reading it, I started to cry because I realized I'm not crazy, that what I experienced is real. It was real for hundreds of people identified in the book. It was real for me.
I was taught from a very early age, just like a lot of other Catholics or people in other religions or cultures, that there's a vengeful God that is watching everything I do. Somebody's keeping track. In the Catholic Church, you know, you get so many days in purgatory for stealing a candy bar, but if you say a rosary, you get 300 days indulgence off your time in purgatory. It's a huge math problem. So I lived my life believing that. Well, it doesn't work that way. But now I know that's BS. It's not true. God is not vengeful. He is not sitting on a throne. This is a test that I chose to learn things. And when I die, I go straight back to God. There's no hell for me or anybody unless you believe it, unless you choose it, unless you make it yourself. And that's why I went, so I can come back and tell all those people out there, stop giving hell power. You don't have to go. You're a good person. You're living a life, learning experiences, and you're going to do good sometimes, and you're going to do not so good sometimes. But that's not a judgment. You just try.
There is still contact with people, usually those with whom they have been associated in the hours of sleep. There is still the reception of impression from environment and associates, and there is still the recognition of relation with, as on earth, the assumption of responsibility.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional type of family environment. I moved from one family to the next, to the next, to the next. I never really got a sense of being a part of a family. But here, these three beings at first greeted me, and eventually a dozen came, and they were my family. I like to think of them as a soul family. And they were welcoming me home.
Next, I remember finding myself in some other place, not knowing how I'd gotten there. The first being of light was gone, and I was surrounded by other beings or people who I felt as though I recognized. These beings were like family, old friends, who'd been with me for an eternity. I can best describe them as my spiritual or soul family. Meeting these beings was like reuniting with the most important people in one's life after a long separation. There was such an explosion of love and joy on seeing each other again between us all. The beings communicated with me and one another in some kind of telepathic way. We spoke without words, directly from mind to mind, or from spirit to spirit. None of us had any bodies. We were all made of some unbeknownst substance, like a concentration of pure light. We were like dots of light in the light.
He becomes consciously aware of himself. This involves a clarity of perception unknown to the average man whilst in physical incarnation.
I reached a point where I had this clarity. It was like a state of what I just call a state of clarity, where I understood why I had the cancer. I understood how it was that thoughts and choices I had made through my life had caused me to get sick. And I understood how it was that I had repressed my energy in such a way that my body literally expressed the cancer as an outlet for the energy that I had repressed through my lifetime. And I understood that I was all of us, not just me, but all of us beings are powerful spiritual beings. And our bodies are actually magical, but I had never known that. I had lived a life believing I was disempowered, but we are a lot more powerful than we have ever been led to believe. And all the fear and the pain and everything was gone. And then I became aware, because as I continued to expand, I became aware of other beings around me who were there to help me through this dying process. And I recognized some of them, not all, but I recognized some as being people from this lifetime, this life who had passed on. And there was my dad who had passed away 10 years prior to this experience. And this happened to me in 2006. And then there was my best friend who had passed away 2 years prior, and they were there and they wanted me to know that they had been with me through the cancer journey and they had been helping me. And I just felt like this love was, this unconditional love was indescribable, because I had spent a lifetime of believing that I needed to prove myself to other people and I needed to work hard at being worthy and deserving of love and approval. But here I was now without my body on the other side, feeling this pure unconditional love just because I existed. It felt like I didn't need to do anything to win it, or I deserved it just because I existed and it was always there for me. That was the understanding I felt.
So we have brains that are not functioning well enough to produce consciousness, and yet we have people saying, I was conscious throughout the whole procedure. In fact, I was more clear then than when I'm stuck back here in the brain with all the limitations of the brain on me. How do we know that there's anything to any of this? Well, occasionally people bring back from a near-death experience some verifiable information. And this is the same thing that Sam is trying to do with this AWARE study, trying to put targets that are unexpected in places where people can see when they leave their bodies. And we have lots of anecdotes of people who have done this, who have said, yes, I left my body and I saw Dr. So-and-so kick over the stand, or I saw this or that, and they're accurate. And sometimes they are very surprising things that they report to us, things they couldn't possibly have guessed. We also have people bringing back from a near-death experience information they couldn't have gotten about other things as well. Sometimes they have met and communicated with deceased loved ones who have told them information that they couldn't have gotten in other way. There are cases of people who have met these deceased loved ones that no one knew had died. And we have many cases documented this where people who talked about seeing deceased relatives included Uncle Joe, who everyone thought was still alive. And you didn't find out until days later that Uncle Joe had died a few minutes before this person had his near-death experience.
Time, being the succession of events as registered by the physical brain, is now non-existent as we understand the term.
In this moment, I was left with the feeling of all was well, will be well, and is well. And this is something that so many of us are not used to. We're used to pensing ourselves for Tuesday or Wednesday for something happening, or the bills being due in a couple of days. We're not used to being enough just as we are, in a place of endless peace and endless eternity, where there is no time. Past, present, future is all in the one moment.
I had just stepped outside my body. But there was also a knowing that there was no time in this state, that I had access to past, present, and future all at the same time, because time wasn't relevant in this state. Time was just something that I experienced on the earth plane.
But one of the most important lessons from that life review is that the universe can show us things in profound ways that are completely outside of our little linear narrative of Earth time. And in fact, what I found early in my kind of interpretation of my experience in trying to understand it, I had to come up with the notion of deep time. Deep time is an ordering of causality at a much richer, deeper level. Earth time, what we see here for the events of our lives, is part of the fiction, part of the stage setting on which the drama unfolds. But there's a much deeper causal ordering of events. That's where you would be measuring, for example, the progression of a soul through multiple incarnations, or the evolution of all of consciousness, all of sentience.
And as the man turns his attention to his more clearly defined emotional self, there ensues invariably a moment of direct soul contact. For a brief second the soul responds, and the nature of the response is such that the man sees the experience of the past incarnation spread before him like a map. He records a sense of timelessness.
And suddenly, my life, it's like a life review. I was able to see all of my life again, all the way back to babyhood. And I discovered we shared energy. Everyone I ever talked to, their energy was part of me and my energy is part of them. And I had the privilege, if you will, of being able to see how my energy affected them and how their energy affected me. And to go on from there to realize how my energy affected everything.
And then the next experience I had is that I've later learned to be a life review. And what I did is I reviewed all the things that happened in my life. Not that I was living them, or not that I was seeing them as a voyeur, but almost as if I was everywhere, that I was part of everything. And I was aware of everything that went on. And I was aware of every thought that everyone had around me in every situation. And all of a sudden, my life took on new meanings. Every interaction I had, I saw that it was different for everyone else there. Everyone had their own purpose for being in every situation. And so when I reviewed my life, I would learn so many things about new situations, and I'd learn so much wisdom from my experiences. And then when I completed my life review, my awareness was raised. And then I would do my life review again. Now I could look at my life review with a new set of eyes, with my increased awareness. And that went on time and time again. But as I began to address very, very deep and dark pains in my life, each time I overcame that dark episode, I would feel bliss. I would feel enlightened. I would feel like this big weight was lifted off me because I had an understanding of the meaning and the message, and that fueled my spiritual growth and my happiness. For me, the beauty was in being free from all the pains of life. It's that it was just, imagine that you had no anxiety. You weren't angry with anybody. You didn't have any hate or jealousy towards anybody. No one felt that way about you. And it was blissful each time, no matter how difficult that life review was going to be. I knew at the end, I would feel bliss. And then when I stopped learning, I moved on to the next situation.
The life review is very commonly described as being ultra real. You know, you can experience things from your life in great detail. These are not vague memories, but sharp, rich reliving. And not only that, but you feel the emotional power of your actions and thoughts on others around you. So the life review is also showing you boundaries of self are false.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually perceiving parts of my future. The interesting thing was that in the part where I had lived my life, that was crystal clear. But when I passed that threshold into my future life, then it wasn't quite as clear. It was like I was looking down a corridor, and that corridor was clear. It was like out of focus, but I had this corridor of clarity. And it felt like I could go off to the right if I wanted and come back, or go off to the left a little bit if I wanted and come back. And I got the feeling that that was what we would consider as our free will. And so I kept going down this corridor and experiencing things that I really didn't have any reference to.
Love, you know, was just beautiful. And I'm feeling very, very much at peace. And then pretty soon I had something different. I had a life preview that went from age 8.5 to 58.5, as it turns out, about 50 years in advance. I saw where I was going to live. I saw myself in a war, in helicopters, flying around, you know. And you got to realize in the early 1950s, nobody knew what a Huey helicopter was, but let alone what it looked like. It was just being on the drawing boards. And there was a war going on that I was a part of. I could tell it was in an Asian country. But I didn't know much about it. But I saw myself there sitting behind a machine gun and a helicopter. And I saw events and things unfolding that I knew as I was watching them, that I was watching my future self, that is something that's going to happen to me. Saw the woman that I married as a child. We met when we were 14. I met her and I knew who she was. And we dated in high school, and I knew I was going to marry her. And I saw my children. I saw some other strange things. I saw assassination of President John F. Kennedy, but when I'm 8.5 years old, I didn't know who John F. Kennedy was. He was certainly not a president or a national, you know, presence in anybody's life in California. So when I saw that, and I saw other life events where I was going to work, where I was going to live, who I was going to meet. So there was two things to get out of that. I'm watching that and realizing that, oh, obviously I got to go back. This is not over. If you're having a review going forward, that means you have something to go forward to. So at that point in time, I realized that I wasn't going to be allowed to stay in this nice puffy cloud and feeling good, that I had to go back to that body that was laying on the bed below me, which I felt sorry for.
Death can be best regarded as the experience which frees us from the illusion of form. Man's error at this time consists in his attitude to death, and his feeling that the disappearance of the life out of visual perception through the medium of form, and the consequent disintegration of that form, indicates disaster. Death itself is a part of the great illusion.
And the second thing that I learned through that experience is that death is not real. Death is an illusion. It's a corridor. It's a process. It's a phase that we go through when we travel in and out of different dimensions. But death is not real. There is no end to the infinite eternal nature of who you really are. And at that level, without the body attached to you, without you carrying that body around, you are divine, eternal, infinite, glorious intelligence and light and truth and love. That's the essence of who we are as human beings.
The voice was neither male nor female. It came as if it were a wind that went through me, but I could hear it like language very clearly, very distinctly. But then I hear the voice with the delivery that was very precise and very intense. And it said, in truth, there is no death, only the illusion of death. But I had no idea. Of course, there's death. People die. But no, there is no death. There is only the illusion of death. And as I heard that second concept being presented to me, I felt it to the core of my being. Oh my gosh, we've been mistaken. And all the fear and the dread and the worry, it's not real. This is all an illusion.
You then realize that death is an illusion, just as your identification with form was an illusion. The end of illusion, that's all that death is. It is painful only as long as you cling to illusion.
The current understanding of near-death experiences only emerged following the first publication, in 1975, of Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. All quotations in this video from the Alice Bailey books were published between 1919 and 1949. The quotations show a very early and near-prophetic insight into much of what we later learned from the study of near-death experiences.